All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome on into the Auburn Daily Show, episode 24 of the Auburn Daily Show. Lance Dawe here with you on this beautiful Thursday afternoon in Auburn, Alabama. Excited to talk a little recruiting with you guys today, because there are some interesting things going on the recruiting trail with the Auburn Tigers that I think are worth noting. Most importantly, a potential flip from the University of Alabama. Before we get into that, though, if you're watching post live, go ahead and follow us on our socials. They'll be at the links in the description on YouTube and on Facebook at SI_Auburn on Twitter. You can also follow us on Facebook at Auburn Daily, live streaming every single weekday at 4 on Facebook, Twitch, and the YouTube. All right, so most important thing on the docket today, Auburn is trying to flip Alabama commit Jalil Hurley. Now, if you've not heard about this, Jalil Hurley, 5-star cornerback from the state of Alabama, goes to Florence High School. Auburn is trying to flip him after he committed to the Crimson Tide back on February 22nd. We wrote an article about this over at auburndaily.com. You can go check it out over there. Since committing to the Crimson Tide back on February 22nd, he's taken a couple visits back to Auburn. The Tigers are trying really, really hard to pull off this massive flip. And to be quite honest with you, at least in my time as an Auburn fan, I've not seen Auburn's flip this high profile of a commit from the Crimson Tide. In fact, the two players that I can remember, Reuben Foster and TJ Yeldon, flipped to Alabama over Auburn. So this would be a really, really big first for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think it would be Brian Harsin's first 5-star signee with the Auburn Tigers. And then on top of that, it would also be a flip from the University of Alabama, which would just be absolutely insane. So Zach Blackerby, writer here at Auburn Daily, he had John Garcia on. John Garcia is Sports Illustrated's director of football recruiting, to talk about Jalil Hurley, to talk about a few other recruits that Auburn's going after right now. But they talked about this on the Locked On Auburn podcast. And this is what Garcia had to say. Now, we're going to roll a clip here from their conversation in just a second, but I'm going to tell you what part of what Garcia said. Said this news is obviously this rumor that he may be flipping to Auburn at some point in the future. He said this news is coming right after Hurley took a visit to Auburn. And this isn't the first visit to the Plains since committing to Alabama. He's taken multiple visits to Auburn since he committed to Alabama. Something that Garcia noted is you have to track the visits in this business. And Jalil Hurley is beginning to visit Auburn more often than he does Tuscaloosa. Even before he committed to Bama earlier this spring, he took more visits to Auburn than he did to Alabama. So you're starting to see a pattern here, and obviously the bond between Hurley, Brian Harsin, and Zach Etheridge is something that is real. This is something that Garcia also noted. When TJ Yeldon and Reuben Foster flipped in this Iron Bowl rivalry, they did it late in the cycle, and it's not even May. So point being is, like, if this were to happen, it would be unprecedented. And something that he went on later to say is that, in general, you don't see high-profile guys flip, and when they do, it's very late in the process. You don't see guys flip early. And then this is what he said to wrap things up. This is legitimate smoke about Auburn potentially flipping Jalil Hurley. It's fascinating. I don't know how early that an Iron Bowl flip has ever happened. I think at a high-profile level, this would be the earliest that it's happened that I've covered. And John Garcia has been around recruiting for quite some time. He ain't seen a recruiting finger like Brian Harsin's got recruiting all these different players. And this would be an early, impressive flip for the Tigers if they were somehow able to pull it off. I don't know if they will, but man, Auburn could definitely use him too. I mean, he's a really, really good athlete, played cornerback, played a little safety at Florence, going through spring practice right now with Florence High School. I think he would be a really, really valuable pickup for the Tigers, especially with their depth at cornerback here in the coming years. So let's actually go ahead and roll the clip, the conversation between Zach Blackerby and John Garcia Jr. about Jaleel Hurley and him potentially flipping to the Auburn Tigers.
People cannot stop talking about Jaleel Hurley. The idea of, even though he's committed to Alabama, it seems like Auburn has continued to shower him with love and reach out with their long stretched arms and say, come on, Jaleel Hurley, come on to the Plains. Are they right to feel this optimism around a guy like him?
Well, look, it's certainly right off of a visit, right? And I think this isn't his first visit to the Plains since committing to Bama. So when you start to, use that old adage in this business, track the visits, man. I get asked about Arch Manning every day. Track the visits. Has he been to Ole Miss, in several months? No. So he's probably not going there, right? So track the visits in recruiting always. And Jaleel Hurley is beginning to visit Auburn more than Tuscaloosa. And that is something that is certainly noteworthy in the recruiting space. Now you take it back further. Okay, before he committed to Bama this spring, what did his recruitment look like? Well, he took more visits to Auburn than to Tuscaloosa. So you start to see a pattern, and you obviously know that the bond with Brian Harsin and Zach Etheridge, probably more specifically, is something that is real, and it's something that not only Jaleel but his family is starting to ask more questions about. Now here's where it gets interesting, right?
Right.
Timeline. Okay. Is there a time, and I haven't talked to Jaleel, but I did get a phone call about this yesterday from a good source. What is the timeline for some kind of final decision? Because the kid's already made one verbal commitment. So nobody's going to ask him, hey, when are you making this final commitment? Like it's going to be a flip or not at this point. How soon do you do it politically? How smart is it to do it very soon? There's so many other things that go into this. Especially when it's an in-state kid flipping from one school to the other in this Iron Bowl rivalry.
Yeah,
there's so many things that go into it because we have precedent, right? We've seen kind of how it goes for kids going to one versus the other and then changing their mind at different points. When Yeldon and even Reuben Foster and these guys, when they did it, it was late. It was late in the cycle. It's not even May. This is legitimate smoke about Auburn potentially flipping Jaleel Hurley. Yeah. I haven't confirmed any upcoming visit plans. And look, not a lot of visits are going down now anyway because of spring practice at Florence High School where Jaleel plays and everywhere else in the South. So he's probably not going to take a lot of visits, but coaches are going to visit him up in Florence. So that is something to track in the meantime. But it's fascinating. I don't know how early an Iron Bowl flip has ever happened. And I think at the high profile level, this would be the earliest that I've covered. Elite kids typically don't flip. And if they do flip, it comes later in the game, especially when it's one rival to the other. Jaleel Hurley can absolutely go, and he would instantly be the class headliner for Auburn because right now he's the class headliner for Alabama.
Thank you, Stuart. I'm a moron. Oh my gosh. Point being, okay, well, just to sum that all again, that was John Garcia Jr. I'm a moron, but that's John Garcia Jr. telling you this is not something that you would see on a message board. This is not something that is just floating around out on the internet that you potentially think might happen, even though it's not in the realm of possibility. This is a very legitimate thing. Jaleel Hurley could potentially flip to the Auburn Tigers. This is a reality. Been there, Stuart. Yeah, man. I am. Today's been a day, dude. Today's been a day, and that is just one in a line of things that have happened today. But you know what? It is what it is, man. It is what it is. But what I was saying while I was muted, because I muted myself because a clip was rolling. What I was saying while I was muted is I know there are a lot of people out there that are concerned with the future of Auburn football. They're concerned with Brian Harsin and his ability to develop these guys and actually recruit at a high level and compete in the SEC consistently. I think this flip, if it were to happen, would be a massive step in the right direction. Not just because of the commitment individually, even though having Jaleel Hurley would be awesome, but I think if you take a step back and you look towards the future, I think it sends a message to the fan base that says, we're going to be okay. We're going to be all right. And not only are we going to be okay, but we're capable of doing things like taking 5-star recruits from Alabama. And I know Auburn lost that Iron Bowl last year. I know they did. But they lost it in 4 overtimes with a backup quarterback and a banged up offensive line. I'm just telling you, I think that Auburn can potentially set itself up to compete consistently against the big dogs. And look, if they're going to take Alabama to 4 overtimes with an injured backup quarterback, I mean, if that's your floor and your ceiling is fully healthy with some better recruits down the line, and you're capable of getting those 5-star guys, I mean, I'm very happy with that. Like, I'm very happy with that potential future. I also want to point out this: we're talking about development here, and that was one of the things that was harped on whenever Harsin was hired, is that Boise State was really, really good at taking some of these no-name players and putting them in the NFL. And recently, I don't remember if it was SB Nation or whoever it was, but they put out an article kind of breaking down every single team's ability to put players in the NFL and kind of gave them like a rating based on like the star rating and them actually putting guys in the NFL and how they succeeded. And Boise State was 36th on the list. Now, that's not very high, but what you'll notice is if you go through the list, they're the only group of 5 school within like the top 50. They were really, really good under Brian Harsin in developing guys over the past 7 or 8 years and putting them in the NFL. If Harsin's able to get some better talent, we can compete with the likes of Alabama. And a flip from a guy like Jaleel Hurley to the Auburn Tigers, I think would be a huge step in the right direction. So that's what I wanted to talk about with Jaleel Hurley. I cannot believe I was muted there for about a minute and a half because I'm just a moron. Hey, before we talk about something that I think is relatively entertaining, revolving around Auburn basketball, at least a former Auburn basketball player, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at AU Shirts. AU Shirts is the new place to help you flex your Auburn fandom. AUshirts.com. It's the one-stop shop for Auburn fans being able to support every single major sport here on the Plains. They've got a few new designs. They've been putting up a lot of different awesome designs recently. I think the most notable as of late is Blake Burkhalter's design, Closing Time, with a backwards K. I think that's awesome. They've also got one for Sonny DeShera, Thick King. Josh Hall was repping it just a couple of weeks ago at an Auburn baseball game. You absolutely love to see that. They've got some other designs as well. They've got Auburn Daily merch. If you want to go check that out, they've got stickers. They've got water bottles. They've got notebooks, all different kinds of stuff over at Auburn or AUshirts.com. And right now, AU Shirts is giving Auburn Daily viewers a discount, 10% off your order if you go to AUshirts.com and use promo code DAILY at checkout. That's promo code DAILY, DAILY, for 10% off your order over at AUshirts.com. Would really encourage you guys to check them out. Underrated says recruits see that Auburn is only a few playmakers away on Auburn offense to compete with the world stage. Everyone knows that we already have the hardest scheduling. I think that's accurate. And my thing is like to go back to that Iron Bowl. Like, I understand we lost, right? You can't paint it really any other way other than the fact that you lost, and that's the way it is. And that's the way it is, right? But they lost with an injured backup quarterback and a beat up offensive line. That's what Auburn did in 4 overtimes. Now they kind of choked it at the end of the fourth quarter, but we won't talk about that. But my point being is that Auburn, with a limited roster and significantly less talent, took Alabama down to the wire, a team that was the runner-up for the national championship. And like Underrated said, everyone knows we've already got a really difficult schedule, just a couple of playmakers away. And I think guys like Jaleel Hurley, who are playing cornerback, acknowledge that and are like, you know what? I can come make my mark here on this defense. And if they can get it under control on offense, just a couple of pieces away, you know, I'm on a potentially an SEC championship caliber team. I'm on a playoff caliber team. I'm on a national championship caliber team. Auburn just needs to bring some of those playmakers in. And I think a lot of it has to do with how they perform at quarterback. But I think this past national title from Georgia proved you don't need an elite quarterback to go out there and win a national championship. You'd love to have it. You'd love to have at least an above average one. Certainly, I think that's what Stetson Bennett is. But you don't need a crazy elite quarterback to go win a national title. You can use defense. You can use talent in the trenches. You can use skill position players to get you there. It's not all about QB, even though some teams thrive whenever they do have an elite quarterback. So if Auburn's able to succeed with a slightly above average quarterback and a stout defense, I think that's in the realm of possibility, especially given Brian Harson's track record at Boise. Pausing to drink water. We can do that on the live. Nobody judge me. All right. There's a couple of more things that I want to talk about, but I think Underrated made a really good point there. And we'll probably bounce back and forth between topics here. I mean, that's just the nature of the chat. But there's something I wanted to get to with a former Auburn basketball player. Some of you may remember Justin Powell. If you know me from the Locked On Auburn podcast, back in the day, I was an intern with Zach Blackerby, host of the Locked On Auburn podcast. I was an intern Jaws. And during Justin Powell's first 2 games of the season, I was very high on him back during the 2020-2021 season. And I said that in 2022 or 2023, he would be the National Player of the Year because he had an excellent three-point shot. And if he would stay with the Tigers, he would be able to develop and he would be able to thrive in that system and he would go crazy. And we kind of got to see that before he got injured. And then he transferred off to Tennessee and everybody just kind of hated him. I don't really know exactly what happened there with Justin Powell. There are a lot of rumors out there as to what could have potentially happened with him. Sorry, I got a crick in my neck. But my point being is it was potential that left Auburn and ended up at Tennessee. And a lot of people were expecting Powell to perform like he did with the Tigers with Tennessee. And he's in the transfer portal. He has officially entered the transfer portal again after a subpar season with the Tennessee Volunteers, looking for his third school in as many years. Powell averaged over 11 points, 6 rebounds, and 4.7 assists per game during his freshman year at Auburn before he got a concussion. Again, don't really know what happened there, but he left Auburn, and according to 24/7 Sports, after he did an interview, he said that he left Auburn in search of competition. In my opinion, he found that with the Volunteers. He wanted people that could challenge him for his minutes, and he wanted to be able to go and compete. And certainly he did with the Volunteers. And in fact, he lost whatever battle he was fighting, whatever competition he was fighting. His minutes were split in half as opposed to what he was doing at Auburn. And he took a massive dip in production. He went from averaging 11.7 points to 3.7 points per game. He shot 5% worse from three, like 3% worse from the field, and only started 1 game for Tennessee. And here is what 24/7 Sports had to say about Powell last year after he was a few games into his time with Volunteers. This is quoting directly from a 24/7 Sports article. Powell said after Tennessee's 86-44 win over Presbyterian that he wanted to join a team full of great players who would push him every day and make him earn his minutes. Veteran Vols coach Rick Barnes and his staff pushed hard for Powell, telling him he could fit the exact profile of a piece they'd been missing and that he'd be a cultural fit in their locker room, but they didn't promise him anything but an opportunity. Powell, in my opinion, certainly got what he wanted, but it might not have been specifically what he was asking for. To quote Walk the Moon in their song Iscariot, that's what you wanted, but it was not what you were asking for. That's what you wanted, but you're going to get more than you bargained for. And I think that's the epitome of what happened with Powell in this situation. I don't know what happened with Auburn. I don't know the situation of how things went and why he transferred. But according to his own mouth, he wanted to go somewhere where there was competition and he'd be able to earn his spot. And Barnes said, "You'd be a great piece for us." And then he couldn't go out there and execute. And now he's in the transfer portal again. Part of me is like, I can't believe you left Auburn. You could have been a great shooting guard. You could have been a really good small forward. Technically, Auburn could still use him at small forward. I know some people are just so opposed to that idea because you hate Justin Powell for whatever reason. Fine. But like, Auburn could still use him at small forward. And I know people are like, well, there's Alan Flanagan. There is Alan Flanagan. That's right. But Alan Flanagan's not playing fantastic right now, and Devin Cambridge is gone. So unless Chance Westry just absolutely explodes onto the scene, having Justin Powell as a backup or even a starter over Flanagan, depending on how he was playing, how efficient he was playing, I think would be really, really, really beneficial for this offense if Katie Johnson's going to continue to play the way that he's playing, which is not shooting worth a rip. And that's just call it like you see it. Katie Johnson, love his energy, love his defense, love who he is, love his personality. There's nothing particular about his form that I don't like. It's just he's not shooting well from three, and he wasn't in the season. It would be nice to have somebody like Powell to kind of replace that, but that's not going to happen. And it's a shame that he was not able to stick with Auburn. But you know what? He's on the move now, and I don't know where he could end up. I hope he doesn't end up back in the SEC. Because if he does land on a roster where he is provided an opportunity to start, I wouldn't want to play against that. I still think there's a lot of talent there. But yeah, it's a shame that things ended the way they did with Justin Powell. I hope he, for his sake, he's able to perform. But man, it's been a rocky career. And I saw several people on Twitter point out the fact that, he's been on a different team every single year since his freshman year in high school. Sometimes you have to wonder if it's not particularly the team, but rather it's the player and the people around him who support him and are helping him make decisions. Something to think about. All right, there's one more thing I wanted to talk about here. It's our stat of the day, as we normally do. Auburn football on early downs. And whenever I say early downs, we're essentially talking about first and second down here. Our stat of the day we put up just a couple hours ago over at auburndaily.com. And here is the statistic. Well, actually, before we get to the statistic, I'm just going to kind of prep it by saying this. There were a lot of people last year that were not fans of the way Auburn operated on first and second down, specifically throwing the ball instead of giving the ball to Tank Bigsby. And I was in that camp. I'm still in that camp, by the way. After reading this statistic, I'm still in that camp. But I think that this statistic will kind of make people go like, Auburn actually kind of had some success throwing the football early. So here's your statistic of the day. Last season, on first and second down, Auburn's quarterbacks were a combined 198 of 304 for 2,117 yards with a TD to INT ratio of 11-1. So on first and second down, when they threw the ball, their touchdown to interception ratio was 11-1. They had a 65% completion percentage, and they threw for over 2,000 yards. Hype. That's awesome. That's incredible. But what does this statistic particularly mean? And also appreciate you, Gregory Lawrence in the chat. War Eagle to you as well. Underrated. I'm going to get to your comment in a second. Don't worry. But what does this statistic mean? It means, well, Auburn had above average success throwing the ball on early downs in 2021. And so you may say, still they should have given the ball to Tank more, especially late in the season. And I agree, which is why I think you need to dig into this statistic a little bit more. Bo Nix actually did most of the heavy lifting for Auburn before he got injured. And I think most of the games in the back half of the season, you were saying you got to give the ball to Tank a little bit more. You got to give the ball to Tank a little bit more. When TJ Finley was out there, you got to give him some more touches. So we noted 65% completion percentage, a touchdown to interception ratio of 11-1. So let's see what Bo Nix did as opposed to what TJ Finley did on first and second down passing the ball. Nix was 149 of 223. That is 66.8%. That's a 66.8% completion percentage with a TD to INT ratio of 9-0. So I know a lot of people wanted to criticize Bo Nix for how he was playing at Auburn, and he was not playing well. Let's just be clear with it. was not playing fantastic. But I did think that we got to see better things out of him. Especially I think decision making was a huge thing that he improved on last season before he got hurt. But Bo Nix on first and second down completed essentially 67% of his passes and didn't throw a pick, threw 9 touchdowns last year. That's good. Like that's good. That's really good. Of course, you got to think about what he did on third down, and that kind of averaged things out. But it is what it is. But TJ Finley, on the other hand, on first and second down, was 49 of 81, 60.4% completion percentage on first and second down with a TD to INT ratio of 2-1. So TJ Finley had subpar numbers whenever he threw the ball on first and second down, and he actually threw a pick on an early down. And I believe that was in the Iron Bowl to Kobe Hudson. It was off a tip ball to Kobe Hudson, if I'm not mistaken. But TJ Finley's completion percentage actually gets even worse when you look at passes that were only passes that were thrown beyond the line of scrimmage. So if you take out all of the completions that he had that were thrown behind the line of scrimmage, his completion percentage plummets from 60.4% to 47% on first and second down. So on first and second down, when TJ Finley tried to throw the ball past the line of scrimmage, he wasn't even completing passes half the time. There's no other way to slice it other than that's bad. Of course, the question you then have to ask is like, well, was the sample size that he got last season, can that validate that statistic being consistent in this season? I don't know. That's something that you could kind of debate over. All I know is that it wasn't good last year. And I think my takeaway from this, while Auburn overall did a good job of taking advantage of things on first and second down last year, it's going to be interesting to see if Auburn's new offensive personnel, I mean, they don't have a ton of new offensive personnel, but like specifically at quarterback, if that personnel is able to execute as well as Bo Nix did, which is weird to say. But again, you look at the numbers. I mean, 67% completion percentage with no picks on first and second down. That's great. Like I don't care who you are, that you take that. And I know that's probably not Heisman winning numbers, but you take that. Actually, it might be close to it if you get like a full season. But anyway, while Auburn has limitations in run blocking, they'll have to throw, I think, often in 2022 early. And so Finley, Calzada, Ashford, whoever starts, they've got to be able to perform like Nix did on first and second down. So that's your stat of the day there. Just thought that was interesting. And then underrated commented just a few minutes ago. Auburn doesn't need players to be a reflection like Cam Newton or Nick Marshall in the SEC or college football playoff. That's history. What's wrong? That's what's wrong with the higher ups and a good portion of fans. And I think that's an excellent point, because you look at what Auburn's got. If we're just going to stick on the topic of quarterback, look at what Auburn's got at quarterback right now. And TJ Finley, Zach Calzada, and Robbie Ashford. I think that there was a group of fans after A-Day, trying to figure out how to word this. There was a group of fans after A-Day that were like, Ashford definitively needs to be the starter, hands down, no debate, make it happen right now. And he may end up being the starter. He could win the Heisman. I don't know. All I'm saying is that I made the joke on the show. It's like the worst thing to happen to Auburn's fan base is for them to bring in a transfer quarterback that can move a little bit, because the fan base will immediately be like, there he is, boys. He's a dual threat. He can run it. We have to have a quarterback that runs in order to succeed. And I think while the personnel on roster still kind of reflects that truth, 2 years from now, that's not going to be true. Auburn will not need a quarterback that runs to win games. And you don't need somebody like Cam Newton or Nick Marshall. Now, if you're trying to run that system, you're going to need it. I think that was a complaint with Gus Malzahn. I was like, bro, if you're going to run this system, why don't you get a quarterback that can run? Or are you getting Jarrett Stidham and Sean White out here? Like even Bo Nix, Bo Nix had some athleticism, but he was not Nick Marshall or Cam Newton. If you want to make that offense hum, if you want to make it roar, get a Cam Marshall get a Nick Marshall or Cam Newton. So yeah, I think that's a really good point, saying that's history. And that's an issue with some of the fan base. I'm not saying everybody's like that. And I'm not saying it's wrong to say a dual threat quarterback can be good. It's just look at the situation. It's different now. Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And then underrated also said, the powers that be didn't want to give Venables or Billy Napier the breathing room or all the resources to elevate the program. How do you see them giving Harsin the time that he needs? I don't think that they will, quite frankly. I think this year, if he goes 7-5, they're going to take a really hard look at potentially getting him gone, or letting him go, excuse me. And I don't necessarily think that's the right thing. Of course, I'm not the powers that be, but I think that they would legitimately take a look at, like, okay, you got 2 years, you're gone. You're not going to be able to do this for us. But I think that if they weren't able to give Venables or Napier the room, like I just said, I don't think they're going to give Harsin the time he needs. But the only reason I think they might is because everything that happened during the spring with what came out with Harsin and them trying to get him fired. I think that let's look at this. Let's take a step back and look at this from like a 3,000 foot view, right? If Auburn lets go of Brian Harsin after 2 years, and it's pretty clear that the people behind the scenes are the ones making that happen. The people that have the money are the ones that are making these decisions, and they're saying you have to fire him, and Auburn fires him. If it's pretty clear to the media and to everybody out there in the coaching sphere that Auburn, the people in power at Auburn, don't play nice, they don't give you what you need to succeed, and they have everybody on a short leash, who's going to come coach? Who's going to come coach? Especially if we're talking about throwing out money for another buyout. Who's going to come coach, and how are they going to get that money for that coach that could potentially give us more success than Gus Malzahn or Brian Harsin? I don't know, man. I don't know. I think that it's going to take a lot more than what I think the powers that be. It's going to take worse than 7-5 for the powers that be to fire Harsin and it be legitimate. It's going to need to be like 4-8 or 5-7. For me to be able to say this is worth it, not just for the current state of the program, but for the future. I'm concerned about the future. I'm very concerned with that Texas and Oklahoma coming into the conference. It scares me, dude. And then Underrated also says, if they remove Allen Green, I can see them firing Harsin after the season. Yeah. And if I think Allen Green wants to be here. Let's be clear. He's had several interviews recently. He did a couple with the War Report. Don't know if you guys watched them, but he did a couple of interviews, and one of them, he just straight up said, this is the place I want to be. I wanted to come here to win, so I'm going to do everything that I can to put my programs in position to win, and we are going to do so. I'm confident in that. But I don't think he's going to leave just because. I don't think he's going to leave just because to go somewhere. I think the athletic department or the powers that be would have to go in and extract him and say, move, we're going to take care of Harsin. So yeah, Gregory Lawrence says Harsin can't have below 7 wins to obtain a third year, and that's even if he were to convince a nice amount of 2023's in-state Hall to come aboard. It's that tough to persuade the power brokers, and yeah, that's what I'm saying. He's like, he has to do 7-5, 8-4. Like and honestly, he may have to do 8-4. And we talked about this a couple days ago. That's a tough ask. Like, that is a tough ask of Brian Harsin, but it's what's expected. And I'm essentially saying, I don't think that's fair. And I don't think that's logical if you look down the road at what could happen if you decide to make this decision now. And I think the example that a lot of people keep coming back to is, do you want to end up like Tennessee? Do you want to end up like the Volunteers over the past decade or so, where you just don't have any sort of stability or consistency? You can't recruit, you can't coach, you can't win, you can't do anything, and you're just stuck in turmoil and your fan base hates everything. Do you want that? Because I think that's possible. I think that's on the table, Auburn, to become the Tennessee of the next decade. Gregory says I'd say 8-4, and that's a tall order. Hopefully for the sake of Auburn, he's that berserker. Yeah, I think my prediction will be like 8-4 this year, and Auburn's got the potential to do that. I don't know I don't know who's the quarterback's going to be, so it's really, really hard to kind of get a feel for the ceiling of this team. It's there's legitimate reason to be concerned about Auburn football right now. Now, I don't think it's right to be mad or just angry, because again, it's just a sport. But like, yeah, there's reason to be concerned, but there's also reason to be optimistic. Robbie Ashford, Zach Calzada, even TJ Finley, who knows? The offense may pop off. Brian Harsin was really, really good at developing talent at Boise State. Who's to say that he can't overachieve in the SEC after getting some experience? Underrated says, did Auburn and Bama move to the East once Oklahoma and Texas move to the SEC? I don't know if they're going to do that or if they're going to do a pod system. And I myself, like, I've put together a couple different pod systems. We've seen primary examples of different pod systems out there where you could like rotate and different things like that. And I don't know what's going to happen there. Like, and I don't know if those conversations have been had yet, where like they're setting in stone, like objectively one thing or the other. It's like, okay, we're going to the pod system in 2 years. I don't know if the SEC said that, or if they've said we're going to still be in divisions and we're just going to make that happen. I would assume divisions, and I'm curious to see what that looks like. I would like to see Auburn and Alabama move to the SEC. Of course, I still want to be able to play LSU consistently, right? I'd like to be able to play Ole Miss. I don't care about playing Texas A&M at all. Lawrence says 7-5 would have to field a hellified productive unit, especially on the offensive side of the ball with Harsin being an offensive coach. Yep. You've got to be able to score points. We talked about that recently on the show. You got to be able to put some points up. If that's your identity, make it happen. And I know that the personnel situation's tough. It's a really difficult job. But if he's able to pull off 8-4, I'm very happy about the potential of the future. And then Lawrence says, whatever moves are made, they'll force Texas, A&M, and Oklahoma to renew their old rivalries. And I think it's a good thing. I think that those games will be a lot of fun. Now, again, like I said, I don't care about playing Texas A&M on the same side of the conference. Yeah, they're all going to probably, if we're talking about them potentially moving to divisions, they're all going to be in the West, I think. And then you move Auburn to the East, I guess. I don't know if they're going to do pods. Like I said, I don't know. All I know is that I've seen some pod systems out there that have said like put Auburn and Alabama in a pod with like Tennessee and Vanderbilt, and I'm just like, no, like no, thank you. I will not. No, I reject that. I would like to be able to consistently play Alabama, Georgia, Florida, maybe Tennessee, LSU. And I know these are all really good teams. We're not going to be able to get this perfect world here. But yeah, those are probably my 5 that I would like to see Auburn play consistently. And I'm curious to see what happens. So maybe a move to the East is what's needed. Of course, I don't want to have to play Vanderbilt every year. That's just like, that's a waste of a game, man. Like even people will be like, sweet, free dub. Like, but like for me, it's just like that's so boring. You know? I don't know. Maybe that's just me not thinking right. I don't know. But we'll probably talk underrated. We'll probably talk a little bit more about conference realignment. Just saying that just threw me back to NCAA 14, those good old days. But we'll probably talk about conference realignment more during the offseason because Texas and Oklahoma are coming. They are coming. One way or another, they're going to be here. And I'm curious to see what that looks like. Also curious to see if the smoke surrounding an expanded playoff ever comes to fruition. Lawrence says, I'm a shrewd traditionalist, firm believer that the newcomers should be scattered about, but it's insane that schools won't play each other for 68 years in the current format. Yeah, I'm with you there that Auburn, with the way that the East rotates, that they don't get to play some teams for forever. I don't like that. And I think it's fair that the newcomers should be put in different places. But also, I think that it would be fun to see Texas and Texas A&M play, and then A&M and Oklahoma. Like, you don't want to get rid of the Red River shootout. If the offense gets better with production from last year, we can go 8-4. We were in every game while still learning the system. They'll be better. And that's probably a message that I'm going to continue to repeat in different ways throughout this offseason. I think that's spot on. We were in a lot of different games, especially down the stretch. If you got a quarterback that's healthy, you probably win 2 out of those final 3 games, right? South Carolina, Alabama, Houston. And I think that now that you've gotten 2 years into Brian Harsin's system, and not only just let's take out the systems for a second. Let's just talk about Harsin and his coaching staff, period. He's gotten a year of experience in the SEC. He's gotten his feet wet, probably gotten a little bit more than he asked for. He can now assess things and be like, okay, these are things that we should do during this year against these teams, and here's things that we shouldn't do. Like throw fades on 4th down against Penn State. Lawrence says, my Thanksgiving turkey hasn't tasted the same since the Lone Star Showdown was discontinued. Oh yeah, man. I'm interested in seeing that rivalry come back. Because I'll say this: while Arkansas A&M's fun, doesn't give me the same vibe, man. It's just not. It's not as heated. It's not as heated, in my opinion. But yeah, I'm excited to see the direction the conference is going. I'm excited to see the direction that Harsin takes us. While I'm nervous, I'm also optimistic. Anyhow, all right. I think that's actually going to do it for today's episode of the Auburn Daily Show. Guys, if you aren't following us already, you can follow us on Twitter at @SI_Auburn. You can also follow us on Facebook. Just search up Auburn Daily, live streaming every single weekday from 4 p.m. to about 4:30-ish, give or take. Ran a little over today. Appreciate you guys watching. Quite a few of you in here, actually. Every single day, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch. Follow us on all 3 of those platforms. Would really appreciate it. All right. I will see you all tomorrow. We're going to have the roundtable edition of the Auburn Daily Show. Going to be a lot of fun. Have a great rest of your afternoon, guys, and God bless.